Hey guys, it's Chesney from Team 8300 Power Eagles. Earlier this season, we had the chance to sit down with Eli from Roboknights, Team 8569. Robert and Ali talked to him about outreach and the engineering notebook since their team is known as experts in both those areas. Here's the interview. I hope you enjoy.
Being here. I appreciate you can interview a little bit, and you can write this down as outreach. That's pretty cool. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so we just had some questions to ask you about. We were going to ask you about notebook and outreach, obviously, because you guys are notorious. You guys won state's Inspire Award last year, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That was funny. I know that was, I know, is there a reason that was funny? I'm just curious.
I I don't know. I try to be I whenever anyone says anything like that, I'm a very modest person and so I try to shrug it off or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a really big achievement for us.
Yeah. It's a really big deal. That's really awesome. Yeah. I mean, as much as I know the first inclination is always to be humble and grace professionalism, but that is a really big deal, and that's
Yeah.
really awesome for you guys. Uh, so yeah, I was just gonna ask. So this is mostly aimed towards rookie teams who aren't sure how to get started, and
Mhm.
so I was just gonna ask some stuff about like how do you start your notebook like every year? Do you? I know the notebook got changed from a big notebook to a portfolio, but like how have you adjusted, and how do you start it pretty much every year?
Sure. Yeah. So we actually still make a big notebook. You don't need to, it's not required. But we like it because it's really nice to be able to look at all the things you've done, especially outreach. We have a lot of like very specific ways that we've documented things. What we've done this year, which I would absolutely recommend, is that we've made pretty much templates for everything. So if you've got journal entries, we have a template for that we put things into. We do a what we call an outreach reflection form on all of our outreach events, just to like keep all the details somewhere, and we have templates for that. And it's really good to set up just some clear organizational system that you're going to use at the start of the year. And just try to set that up beforehand, because when you're doing outreach events, when you're doing whatever and you want to document things, you want as little time spent as possible on having to worry about formatting, worry about all that. You want to just know where it goes, and be able to put it there.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. So what all is included in your kind of you said you still make a big notebook. Like what all
Mm-hmm.
do you still make for that? Because I know there used to be a lot of defined sections in the original engine notebook, but I know that do you use all of those still? Do you only use a couple? What do you all do you use?
We still pretty much make all of them because you're a little bit less required. We've definitely changed the way their notebook works, and a lot of our notebook, as it was originally intended to be, is mostly for ourselves. And so specifically outreach is something that we find that it's really important to keep the details of, because we would always forget about outreach from earlier in the season, otherwise. We also try to keep a lot of stuff on mechanical and software, specifically challenges and how we overcome them, to try to, for future years, be able to give, this is the problem we had, this is how we solved it, and try use it as like teaching material. And so it's a lot of it is for our own internal use in future years, or later this year looking at outreach. And so it's really anything that we have learned from, I would say. And that's very vague. But it's kind of, I feel like the notebook is whatever works best for each individual team. And I also haven't worked on the notebook as much this year, so I'm forgetting exactly what sections. But if you want specifics, I can give them. But I think just as a general rule, just experiment and figure out what works for your team.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip. And you can feel free to jump in at any time, Ellie. I don't mind if you like interrupt me or anything. But yeah, that's a really I think that's a really good tip because I know that we've had some problems with remembering what we did wrong and what we need to
Mhm.
like at the end what we need to put in our portfolio. Yeah, I think that's a really good tip. So like I know that I don't think the team started when like as when you joined it. I know that our team was only a year old when I joined it, so I
Mhm.
might have like but basically the question is, what's something that you wish you knew about the notebook, like as a rookie when you first kind of joined FTC? I know the team didn't start like when you started, but like, what's kind of something that you wish you knew about it?
It's a really good question. Um, our team wasn't new when I joined the team, but it certainly wasn't as, like well organized. And so the thing that I've learned most about the notebook is just that you want to really keep everything very organized, because what we found beforehand is even if you have a ton of stuff written down, we had a lot of handwritten stuff which can work, but we would have kind of like stacks of just like random papers, and like they're important stuff, but we don't really know exactly where they go. And so I found organization is really important. And the other thing about the notebook is that, in my opinion, what I've learned, some people might disagree with this, I don't think you can have too much documentation. And so, in my opinion, you should be, like writing everything down. And the other big thing I've learned is take pictures of absolutely everything, because pictures are amazing. And so, no matter how many pictures you take, it's probably not enough. I'm still trying to teach myself to take enough, because pictures are awesome.
Yeah, we've definitely found out a lot about that. We've our portfolio is kind of full of pictures. I think you saw earlier.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we're slowly learning to do more about that. And so you brought up organization, and this is a little bit off topic, but I was just curious because I know another person, Sarah from Tongue Steel, actually brought up the fact that when she kind of got thrust into a administration position this year, and so I was just wondering, how do you kind of organize your team? Like, how is it organized? Do you think it's effective? I know that we have two team captains, and they just kind of like give out jobs, and then we kind of go from there. But like, how do you do it?
So we have a system of organization that we started 2 years ago. We call it our teams system, which is a confusing name, but we haven't bothered to change it because that was what it was on its inception, and it's just kind of what we know it as now. But our team is split into 5 different sub teams for like what we identified as the kind of main groups of tasks that need to be done. We have operations and finance, which oversees kind of all of that administrative stuff, kind of oversees the other teams in a way, in that they're mostly for project management and, as the name says, like finance and stuff. And they kind of handle pulling together the notebook and portfolio, since those are kind of things that encompass all teams. And then we have mechanical and packaging, which is mostly just the robot. We have software and controls, which are, programming the robot. We have outreach and marketing, which is most of our outreach and kind of general other. If we're looking for sponsorships, we might kind of use them. They're most of our, outreach, marketing, that kind of stuff. The names are fairly descriptive. And then we have our strategy sub team last, which is a sub team that's not always super active across the year, but they do things like, figuring out what our game strategy is going to be at the start of the year after kickoff, and then doing things like scouting during the year. And we found that having this very defined organization of our team has been really useful, because it's not necessarily that we push everyone. It's like, oh, you have to be in one sub team and you can't be in whatever. It's if you want to be in a couple, then that's okay. But even if in like practice, it's not very, I don't know, separated between your sub teams, it's nice to be able to have those like different separations. And especially for our notebook, that's how we divide it up. And we have different channels for each one on Slack, which we use for communication. And so even if it doesn't affect each person a ton, being able to have a kind of go-to system of organization is really useful for whenever you need to organize things.
I think that's really cool. I think our team is significantly less rigid in those kind of team sections, but I think that also kind of makes it so that no one's ever completely sure of what they should be doing, and so I like that kind of having a more rigid schedule kind of like pushes on what people need to be doing a little bit. Um, yeah, so I was going to ask a little bit about so for our team, when we basically every meeting we have someone write down the minutes, and we have a template for the minutes, which kind of went into your template that you had a little
Mhm,
bit back there.
mhm.
What do you think is the easiest way to like document everything? Because I know that you said it's kind of more difficult to take pictures of everything, and we have a minutes template. What do you guys kind of do for trying to document pretty much everything that goes on?
It's a very similar thing for us. We have a similar, there's only so much that you can do during meetings because you want to get work done and you don't want to have to stop all of the time in order to write things down. And so it's always a struggle to get to the end of a meeting, maybe a long meeting, and a lot's gotten done, and make sure that you get everything down. And so, what we've done for years, and I don't know if this is best, but our main way of trying to get all of the information is we go around to every single person and ask what they've done today. And it's kind of, it doesn't, when you do it in practice, it kind of helps when it's just thinking about yourself and what you've done to be able to kind of get everything. And it's still not perfect. And we still try to, if you can document something during a meeting, do that. But, we keep all of our journal entries in one big document. And we've got templates for them. And so it's a struggle to get everything and not forget things, I think. But it helps to make sure that you're organized as you guys are. And I don't know if we have a perfect solution, and that's probably something that someone would come up with a better way to make sure you don't forget things.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, it's really difficult to make sure like everything gets down, but I think that's a good idea, and I kind of like that. Um, so I did want to ask a little bit about also like why you do the notebook in general. Why do you think it's important to you and your team just in general?
So we have been, I think the biggest thing is, you were asking me before we were recording, what year am I? And I mentioned that I'm a junior and that we have a number of seniors who know a lot about robotics that are going to have to go away. And so I think part of it is motivated by almost like fear in a sense, in that like next year we need to make sure that we have something to look back to and something to be able to like teach new people with. And so for us it's a lot of sustainability across years. We really try to keep the program going if we can. But I think it's also just like we it's just really, as I've said before, I sound repetitive, but it's really nice also, just to be able to look back at things. And I know that from experience, looking back at things from earlier this year or last year or whenever, I've both learned a lot and I've saved myself time, especially as a programmer. Looking back at code from last year when we did this thing, in my opinion, it's really important to save everything that you've done because it'll come up some year in the future and you'll want to have that archived.
Yeah,
Yeah, our team definitely relates to the we lost people, what do we do mentality. So yeah, writing things down for the sake of people in the future, we definitely understand the importance of that.
Yeah.
you're cutting out a little bit, just so you know, but we did understand what you're saying. So
Yeah.
that was pretty funny.
We got the idea.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's also really important. And I should have I don't know what you think about this, but I think maybe we should have like some of our like team members this year like go over kind of what we did in the past and just like when we're first starting out and be like, okay, this is kind of what we did before, and like look at it. What do you think? Is there anything we could do better? Do you kind of understand what we are talking about? I think that'd be a good idea, and I hadn't even really thought about that, which is an interesting point. But I think that's a really good point. So thank you. Do you like that idea? Should have done that with you, Kari, and them?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Can you hear me better now?
Slightly, yes. I could.
Okay, I don't know what's
Okay.
causing the issue, but
It's okay. We can still understand you. It's just a little bit robotic. It's okay.
good pun there. It's robotic.
That one was unintentional, but that's a good one.
Yeah. That's all. Yeah, so I'm going to ask you about outreach now.
Mhm.
So what was kind of something that you wish you knew about outreach when you kind of started robotics? This is kind of like throwing you in the deep end here where you have to think a lot, but I just am curious.
So the first thought that came to mind, and I'm gonna have to probably refine this as I talk about, but I do that with everything I say, is that outreach can really be almost anything. When it comes down to it, you don't have to feel like you have to be like, going out and doing some. We have these ideas when we talk about outreach that what is typically community service and stuff when you get into robotics, that's what you think of it as. But I think as you get into it more, you realize that really any kind of reaching out and helping people, like this that we're talking about right now, what we're doing can be considered outreach. We're helping out other teams, we're, mutually helping each other. And so what I've found is that you don't have to kind of constrain what you consider your outreach to be. You can look for outreach everywhere. We've done like outreach events all over the place in different circumstances. And it's really just kind of going into things with a mindset that like you can really help people through anything. You can make anything outreach. And so it's just kind of trying to look everywhere and try to find we're a team that we do a lot of outreach, but it's all like very varied outreach. It's not necessarily that we have these couple of huge projects. We have big projects, but I feel like our strength is really just like we look everywhere for outreach and just find as many events as we can. And so there's more than you would expect.
I think that's something that's really good. So that kind of leads a little bit into my question, and I think the outreach ones are gonna be a little difficult. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious. So like, how does your team kind of find outreach, and how do you address coming up with outreach? I don't know if you're on the outreach team of your team, but how do you kind of look for that and how we find them?
Yeah, so looking for outreach, in the past, before COVID and everything, it's been more defined because we kind of like, before I was on the team, before this kind of like group of people that we have on the team now, the team was still very strong in outreach. And so we had kind of developed this like pattern of outreach. We did a lot of outreach at places like libraries and kind of boys and girls club, places like that where you can always find an audience that's interested, and you will pretty much never get turned down. You won't go to a library and be like, hey, can we show off cool STEM stuff? And they'll be like, no, like, come on, you can always find stuff, and you can always find people to help. We love doing, one of my favorite outreaches was we would find like libraries and stuff that were typically in areas that were less well off, and we find kind of underprivileged kids who typically didn't have as much exposure to STEM. And so then when you bring the robot and you like drive it around and you let them drive it, you can see that like this is really helping people, and this is something that's really cool and they've never done before. But with COVID, suddenly things have shifted, and everybody, I think, is trying to figure it out at the same time. And so, what we've tried to do to adjust is make sure that we don't because we were forced to do because we were forced to do like I can't use words. Apologies. Because we were forced to do virtual outreach for a while, you know, you can't be with people. Now it's kind of opened our eyes to the fact that that was a kind of thing that we hadn't considered in the past. And so what we've been doing a lot this year and last year is first off, we love volunteering for First in general. We used to do that in person all the time. But now we found if there's a virtual FLL competition, you can referee a competition that's not from your state. You know, I think we refereed in Hawaii because virtual, you sit in your room and you referee matches. And so that's something really cool. We've been trying to rack up our number of states. It's kind of like it's a goal for us at this point. It's really fun. But also just like, what other things we found that outreach where instead of trying to like go places and do a ton of things, outreach where you can reach out to people and kind of show things virtually. We have a outreach initiative that we call Windows, where we like host virtual webinars about and we get leaders from women in STEM and stuff and things like that. And we've had an outreach that we've ran for a number of years before COVID as well, called Socktober. And Socktober is like a sock drive that we host for socks. At one point were the most requested item of clothing by homeless shelters. But the big part of Socktober isn't necessarily what we do, but that we reach out to teams across the nation. And so I think what we've tried to do is, you know, clearly like make our outreach virtual, but that's so vague. But find ways that instead of having to like be somewhere and do some labor or something, you can put your time into trying to reach people virtually and trying to send some important message. And that's still vague. And I wish that I could give some like formula for how to find outreach, but I think that any first team knows that that doesn't exist. And so you kind of just got to keep your eyes open and seize outreach where you see it, you know?
I'm going to hop in here and change the order of the questions that we have. I think what you said leads into a different question that we had. So you gave a couple of examples of outreach events that your team has done. If you could identify a common denominator or like a key success factor between them, what do you think makes outreach events successful? And how would you find a successful outreach opportunity?
That is a very good question, which is what people say in interviews when they're trying to stall because they're trying to think of the answer. And so give me a second here.
You can take as much time as you need. You do not need to. This is not a pressure. You're all good.
Oh, no, I know. I would say that our outreach recently, the common denominator has just been like, it's not about doing something that like totally changes, you know, someone's like, you don't have to do outreach that, you know, is this big, huge thing that totally changes someone's, you know, entire universe or something. You can do outreach that's just something small that helps people and do that on a really large scale. And so I think that what we have found success in, and this might just be our team, other teams do things differently, but our team, what we prefer to do is we prefer to find little things that still are meaningful and make a difference and try to reach as many people with those as we can. There's one outreach event we have, or one initiative that we've had for a while. It started before the Roblox team, but it's been integrated into the Roblox team, called Square Peg Nation, where we give out fidgets to first teams, to people at schools. Fidgets help with anxiety. We try to spread messages and education about neurodiverse youth and stuff like that. And so that kind of an outreach, what we end up doing is, say we go to a FTC competition, if we can because of COVID. We give out like enough fidgets for every person on every team to have like one fidget, and one fidget might not make this huge difference on each individual person, but because we're spreading the message we want to, and because we know that for some people that's really meaningful because we've had that experience ourselves, it's kind of this idea that you can do things that are small as long as they're meaningful and you reach a lot of people with them. And so that's still kind of vague and doesn't apply to all situations, but that would be the best thing that I could think of.
Okay. You want to ask? Okay, cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I remember getting one of those before, and that was very cool. I really enjoyed the fidget. It was very nice. I honestly I don't remember if it was from your team or not, but I think it was because you guys are cool, and I like Roboknights every competition. So yeah. So what do you kind of think is the most important part of an outreach activity? Like what do you value in a good outreach? I think Ali kind of hit on this question, with what she said. What do you consider successful? But what do you kind of think is like an important part of making an outreach a successful, good outreach activity?
um I mean,
But
one of
it just yeah.
one of the biggest things for me is just that outreach should be fun, and so in my opinion, we have on our outreach reflection forums, we have a bunch of information about what it was, how long it took, kind of stuff like that. And then we have one question at the end, that's just a like circle yes or no, and it says, would you do this outreach event again? And in my opinion, the most important thing about outreach is that it's something that you enjoy and that you're passionate about. And we have had a couple of outreach events where we circled no for that question. And that means that that's not outreach that we should be pursuing, because outreach should be genuine and it should be something that you enjoy and that's fun and that you're passionate about. And so in my opinion, what makes outreach successful is if you kind of do what you set out to do, whatever goal you set, if that's giving fidgets, if that's, hosting webinars, and that you have fun at the same time and that you enjoy it. Because if you enjoy it, then you're going to want to keep doing it and you're going to want to search for more. In my opinion, outreach shouldn't be forced, because you're trying to help people and you want to just be, you want to be helping them for the right reasons. And so that's my opinion. It's kind of a little cliche, like, yeah, you should have fun, but that's what I think about it.
Yeah, so that kind of the next question. I was curious about an outreach activity that you've done and that you kind of find successful, and I was just wondering about what you think made it successful. Like, I don't know if it was the having fun and enjoying it part, or if there was anything specific that you could point to be like, this is why I think it was a good outreach activity, or why it did well. And I was just curious about what you thought.
So for me personally, outreach the outreach that I find most like successful and most fulfilling, that's a weird word to use, but it kind of gets what I mean across. And so I guess I mentioned the outreach at the libraries for, underprivileged kids before, and those really made an impact on me, because I could tell that, all we were doing is letting them drive the robot or something, which was kind of terrifying, but was, it's not this huge thing. And I find that, like, I could tell that it made an impact on people, and that was something that really, affected them. So with these kids, it was because they hadn't been introduced to STEM much before. And so now getting to drive a robot around was like the coolest thing. But I've also seen it with things like giving out fidgets and stuff. when you give kids fidgets, or we had the whole like fidget stations where you could put together your own fidgets, and you could tell that for some people that just totally clicked and that made a really big impact on them. And for me, that's the most like successful thing, is if I can see that our outreach really made an impact on someone. But everyone probably defines that a little bit differently.
Gotcha. That's a really good answer.